Scottish folk and fairy tales. These are tales of brownies. This is the first one, the Scottish brownie. The Scottish brownie formed a class of beings distinct in habitat and disposition from the freakish and mischievous elves. He is a meagre, shaggy, and wild in appearance. In the daytime, he lurked in remote recesses of old houses which he delighted to haunt, and in the night, sedulously employed himself in discharging any laborious tasks which he thought would be acceptable to the family to whose service he devoted himself. But the brownie does not drudge from hope of recompense. On the contrary, so delicate is his attachment that the offer of reward, but particularly of food, infallibly occasions his disappearance forever. It is told of a brownie who haunted a border family now extinct, the lady having fallen unexpectedly into labor, and the servant who was ordered to ride to Jedburgh for the midwife, showing no great alertness in setting out. The familiar spirit slipped on the great coat of the lingering domestic and rode to the town on the laird's best horse and returned with the midwife. During the short space of his absence, the Tweed, which they must necessarily ford, rose to a dangerous height. Brownie, who transported his charge with all rapidity, was not to be stopped by this obstacle. He plunged in with the terrified old lady and landed her in safety where her services were wanted. Having put the horses in the stable where it was afterwards found in a woeful plight, he proceeded to the room of the servant whose duty he had discharged, and finding him just in the act of putting on his boots, administered him a most merciless drubbing with his own horsewhip. Such an important service excited the gratitude of the laird, who, understanding that Brownie had been heard to express a wish to have a green coat, ordered the vestment of that colour to be made, and left him in his haunts. Brownie took away with the green coat and was never seen more. We may suppose that, tired of his domestic drudgery, he went in his new livery to join the fairies. The Brownie of Broadspect. The Brownie of the Farmy of Broadspect in Moffatsdale left his employment upwards a century ago on a similar account. He had exerted himself so much in farm labour, both in and out of doors, that Bodsbeck became the most prosperous farm in the district. He always took his meat as it pleased him, usually in very moderate quantities, and of the most humble description. During this time of very hard labour, perhaps the harvest, when a little better fare than ordinary might be judged acceptable, the good man took liberty of leaving out a mess of bread and milk, thinking that it but fair that at a time of some improvement, both in quantity and quality, was made upon the fare of the human servants, the useful brownie should obtain a share in this blessing. He, however, found his error, for the result of that was Brownie left the house for ever, exclaiming, came Brownie, came, at the luck of Broadside, away to Lithenhead. The Luck of Bodsbeck accordingly departed with its brownie and settled on the neighbouring farmhouse called Lethen Hall, whither Brownie transported his friendship and services. The third tale, The Brownie and the Thievish Maids. On the principal of characteristics of the Brownie was his anxiety about the moral conduct of the household to which he is attached. He was a spirit very much inclined to prick his ears at the first appearance of any impropriety in the manners of his fellow servants. The least delinquency committed either in the barn or cow-house, the larder, he was sure to report to his master, whose interest he seemed to consider paramount to everything in the world, and whom no bribe could induce him to conceal the offences which fell under his notice. The men, therefore, were no less than the maids of the establishment, usually regarded him with a mixture of fear, hatred, and respect, though he might not often find occasion to do his duty as a spy. Yet the firm belief he would be relentless in doing so, provided that he did find on occasion, had a salutary effect. A ludicrous instance of his zeal as guardian of the household morals was told in Peeblesshire. Two dairymaids who were stinted in their food by too frugal a mistress found themselves one day compelled to hunger to have recourse to the highly improper expedient of stealing a bowl of milk and a bannock, which they proceeded to devour, as they thought, in secret. They sat upon a form and space between them, whereupon they placed the bowl and the bread, and they each took a bit and a sip alternately, each putting the bowl down upon the seat for a moment's space after taking a draught, and the other taking it up to her hands and treating herself in the same way. They had no sooner commenced their mess when the brownie came between the two, invisible, whenever the bowl was set down upon the seat, and also took a draught, by which means he devoured as he devoured fully as much as both put together. The milk was speedily exhausted. The surprise of the famished girls at finding the bowl so soon empty was extreme, and they began to question each other sharply on the subject, with mutual suspicion of unfair play on this, when the brownie was undeceived them by exclaiming with mutual glee, "Ha ha! Brownie has he!"